tried to condense about 6 different books that I've read across the last 3 or 4 months into a 1-hour training session. That's literally what I've tried my best to do. They are literally my only rules of what we're gonna go through. First of all, your phones are off, which is already there. Secondly, digestion. I think so many people turn up to training sessions and they sit there going, that's a good idea, making lots of notes, and they leave the room and it just goes in there and goes straight out there. My only request from you guys is that you take 1 hour afterwards and actually reflect and read through your notes so you've actually learnt something from it. The most important thing which is on that board, and I'm actually not even going to rub it off across the entire session, is that you do not need to agree with all the stuff that I'm going to talk about. You do not need to agree with it at all. If you've got a different opinion, you are absolutely entitled to that opinion. But you do need to understand it. Because the stuff that I'm going to cover is how a lot of people think. Okay? It's basically what I've got from those books. There are other books that might contradict that. And across the years, you're going to face clients who have got their way of thinking. You may have your way of thinking. It doesn't always mean that you're right and they're wrong, or they're wrong and you're right. So you don't always have to agree with things in life, but you do need to understand it. Never spend money you don't have on things you don't need to impress people who don't care. But let's think about it for a minute. Let's talk about spending. We're all guilty of this. In my 20s, I reckon I was the worst person at spending money I didn't have on things that I don't need to impress people who really didn't give a damn. But I want you guys to start trying to differentiate between the difference between spending and wasting. And it is vital that you, and this is not something that I can do for you, it is important that when we finish this session, that you guys write down 3 things. And you know what I would do? I'd write them in the front of your diary. But write down 3 things that are important to you. And if you're ever having a bad day, if you're ever sitting there thinking, oh bloody hell, this deal's falling apart, that you always revert back to the things that are important to you. Because when you've got me or Nick or Neil, just get on the phone, do this, do this, do this. That's good because it sometimes gives you a kick in the bum. But the reality is the best person who can motivate you is you. If you don't have goals, how do you know if you're succeeding or if you're failing? You're just sort of bumbling from month to month to month. Money comes in, we do our spending, and then we see what's left, and then we save that amount. And then typically that rolls on to the next month and to the next month. Agreed? Until we've got a really big pot, and then we do something extravagant like go on holiday or something like that. And then our money goes back down to 0 and we start building up again. I want you to think about this concept. Again, you don't need to agree on it, but I want you to start thinking about this concept in your lives. Money comes in, we save, and then we spend. So the point is, unless you know what is important to you, and unless you've got these actual goals, you're going to keep living to your means. And the problem with that as well is it can create depression. Because if you're never content, if you're always looking at other people trying to chase, and if you're never ever content with what you've got, you can actually become quite an unhappy person. I have a little flat here in Dubai which is rented. It's giving me an income every month. It is an asset. I have a place in London which is sitting there vacant. Therefore, it is a liability. Don't think just because it's worth a certain pot, I'm paying every month service charges to keep that going. Therefore, it is a liability. The real estate market can sometimes become sick, but it will never die. Over leveraging. When you're investing, okay, when you're putting money into a property, be so careful that you look at the duration of how long you're going to hold that property. Any real estate broker who says to you it's definitely going to go up, guess what? They're talking nonsense. None of us know. 10 years ago, London was supposed to keep going up and up and up and up and up, and 2 years ago it made its first loss. Nobody knows. Now, if you got into the market in London and you bought at the peak of the market and you put down 10%, 10% to some people is a lot of money. It might not be to you guys, but say you put down a place which is £300,000 and you put £30,000, it might take you 3 or 4 years to earn that. If the market then corrects itself by 10%, you just lost your deposit. If out, you sell. If less people can afford to get onto the property ladder, perhaps the banks aren't lending, perhaps the criteria changes, perhaps interest rates change, perhaps supply and demand changes. There's 101 things that could happen. But if people can't buy, they're probably going to rent. No one's going to sleep rough. So you can either be a landlord, buy and rent, or you can buy and sell, and you can become a trader. Why do you think people over leverage themselves? Yeah, me too. When you strip the layers away, when you take it all away, okay, when you take all of the rubbish away and the jargon and the bankers and the mortgage advisors and the real estate brokers, human nature will always prevail. Greed. And that is the problem with so many people in business. They just get too greedy, they overstretch themselves, and when they go wrong, when it goes wrong, they start crying. The real estate that's paid outright and you've got a tenant will always give you an income. It may become sick, but it will never die. Therefore, it's an asset. But if you've got a mortgage on that property, on paper, your property value could go down, but you still owe the bank the same amount. You're then in what's called negative equity. It's then a liability. So always try and understand what you're getting yourself in for, okay? The same, guys, my only advice to you is that you build your asset column before you build your liability column. I'm not saying don't go out and buy a flash car. I'm never, ever, ever going to say that. I believe in that, and it's one of my weaknesses. I've had the Lamborghinis, the Ferraris, I've had the Bentleys and stuff, okay? But I've never, ever, ever bought it on finance. And I never will. Because it is a depreciating asset and it is a liability. Savers are losers. That is from this book here, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Guys, I won't spend too long on this. I just want you to give this some thought. In 1970, the average interest rate for cash in the bank was 11% in England. Think about that for a second. We weren't even alive then. 1970, your parents were around, okay? Your parents were around, it was 1970. I left £100,000 in the bank. It was giving me 11 grand a year, interest. Now, it is giving me 1%, if I'm lucky. Start valuing your time. Your biggest asset is your time. I want you to write that down. And do you know what? I want you to tattoo that on your arm. Your biggest asset is your time. Always know what your worth is. Always, always, always. And never, ever, ever discount it. I want to talk to you about advice. And I want you guys to always remember this until the days that you die. Please be careful with who you take your advice from in life. This is such an important thing, okay? Let's think about your parents, okay? Your parents have got your best interests at heart. They love you more than anybody, okay? But it doesn't mean that their advice is always right. If your parents are born in the 60s and 70s, they're probably saying to you, Jan, save your money, because that's what they were taught at a young age. Doesn't mean they're right. So be careful with who you take your advice from. Parents are one of the most influential people to get it wrong. The second person is what they call so-called wealth advisors. I like to play games with them. They call me up and they say, would you like some advice on your wealth? What advice would you like to give me? Be so careful. Fancy business cards. I'm a wealth advisor. How much wealth have you actually got? How much money have you got? That's the first question. Any time that somebody approaches you and says, I'm a wealth advisor, tell them, ask me, how much money you got? Oh, not a lot. How are you going to advise me on your wealth if you're not even wealthy? Be so careful with who you guys take advice